Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales About History, and I'm your host, Mike Allen. I don't think many of the people listening to this episode today of Amazing Tales could do what our guest does for a living, which is namely paint the George Washington Bridge. This episode marks the 200th story told on Amazing Tales, and we're bending the rules just a little bit to not actually feature a time in history, but rather a fascinating person who helps us preserve history. Michael D'Onofrio lives in New Fairfield, Connecticut with his wife, and each day he commutes to the New Jersey side of the bridge where he suits up and prepares for yet another day doing tasks that simply couldn't be done by anybody with even the faintest fear of heights, like me. And yet you're going to hear he takes it all in stride. Michael will be along in just a moment. This week's trivia question: he converted 14 square miles of dairy farmland into one of the sweetest company towns in U.S. history. Who are we talking about? Well, stay tuned after the main program for the answer, which will give you the topic for next week's show. All right, so full disclosure, I have a fear of heights. In fact, I've always suspected I have the worst case of it. It's pretty severe and worse than most. My wife, for example, hates tight enclosed spaces like the inside of narrow caves. But for me, walk me to the edge of a cliff, tell me to look down, well, there's some things that are just best left undone. And so it is that on this, the occasion of the 200th episode of Amazing Tales, since it all began back in 2021, we're doing a topic that is the epitome of having a fear of heights: painting and generally maintaining the George Washington Bridge. I don't really understand how suspension bridge technology works, don't care to know. Engineering's not my forte. I leave it to people who know what they're doing. And while I can drive over the George Washington Bridge without too much trouble, the very idea of either walking on the pedestrian pathway or riding my bike across, or heaven forbid, walking up the steel cables to the top of the steel towers, I have trouble even talking about it. That's how bad it is for me. Well, this is one of several reasons why I have a huge appreciation for our guest today. Michael D'Onofrio is a bridge painter for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. He's been working on the bridge for nearly a decade, sometimes dangling hundreds of feet in the air with just a safety cable or two holding him in his harness. I couldn't do what he does, and I admire the courage that he has. Now, not too long ago, we did an episode here on Amazing Tales on the construction of the George Washington Bridge. I showed a photo on social media of an unidentified bridge worker at the top of the bridge. Well, Michael tracked me down to say it was him in that photo. So, Michael, I have been looking forward to this interview. I've told a few people that you and I were going to chat, and when I told them what you did, they said, "Oh my God." And I guess that's, you must go like to parties or places and people say, "Hey, what do you do?" And you say, "Oh, I paint the George Washington Bridge." You must feel a little bit like a rock star. I mean, people must think you walk on water to be able to do this.
Yeah, I get a lot of crazy reactions most of the time.
What do you say when people come up to you and say, "How do you do it?"
I don't know. I just do it. Just like any other job.
Well, now let's talk about that, every other job. So tell me, not your entire resume, but, what kind of jobs did you hold before you got to the Port Authority? And tell me about your work with the Port Authority.
Yeah, I mainly started working in airports. My dad was a mechanic in the airport, so I was always in that area doing things. And I started working ground transportation, airplanes, towing them, fueling them. That's how I learned about the Port Authority. And there was an opening at JFK, so that's where I started.
Was your dad at JFK?
He always rotated around, like mainly LaGuardia, but he worked at almost every airport in the area.
So now you get this job at JFK, and, when I'm on a plane and I look down on the tarmac and I see, people directing the plane or, doing baggage or whatever, was that you? Were you out on the tarmac?
Yep, doing all that. Yeah, fueling planes, moving bags. Kind of surprised they trusted me when I was almost about 18 years old, driving a fuel truck around with 5,000 gallons of jet fuel. That was surprised me the most.
Wow. Now, when I first spoke to you, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and we got talking about this, and I said, "Gee, what made you, leave JFK?" Your answer was you do what everybody else does. You look for a better job somewhere else, right? Is that what spurred you? Tell me that about that decision.
I started working for the Port Authority at JFK doing regular maintenance, but you always want to get more money and better positions. And a bridge painter position opened up, so I applied.
Did it ever cross your mind, oh my God, I'm going to be up on this tall bridge? And did you ever have to have a sort of sit down with yourself and say, am I up to this? A fear of heights or anything like that?
When you apply to be a bridge painter, you have to take a written test first, and once you pass that, you have to do a heights test. So, it was a little nerve-wracking doing the heights test, but once I was up there walking around, it didn't really bother me as much as I'd expect.
So tell me what a heights test consists of.
Yeah, you gotta climb up about 50 feet worth of steel. They're called box cords, and it's at the top of the bridge. So you climb up about 50 feet, and you walk on the very, very top. There's a beam that runs down the middle. You just got to walk across a beam about 6 inches wide. And if you get past that without getting nervous, then you get to walk those tubes. They call the barrels. They're just cables that come off the tower down towards the ground. You got to walk down those.
Now there are you can't call them even railings. I guess they're like strings of steel that go on each side, one for each hand. Are those pretty steady?
Oh yeah, those things are anchored at the top and anchored to the ground, so they're not going anywhere. But they're just steel cables.
Okay, so now I want to ask you a question. When you go up, say, the Empire State Building, and you're in an elevator that goes up 100 feet, that doesn't bother you?
Not in the slightest.
And are you the guy when you get out of the elevator at the Empire State Building who goes and puts his head in between the two, between the metal bars that are there and looks straight down at the street?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah.
So that doesn't bother you at all?
No, not at all.
Wow. Okay, and so when you fly on a plane, let's go back to JFK. When you're actually in the plane flying, first of all, does it bother you to fly?
No, I don't really care about flying.
Are you the guy who always wants the window seat?
Yeah, I like the window seat, but my wife always kicks me out.
Does she mind that you do this?
I don't think that she minds, but I also was working before she met me, so I don't think she had a choice.
So now you've been doing this for 9 years, and I want to talk about, the fact of, like an everyday job, right? So some people today are complaining because they have to go back to the office and they can't work from home anymore, remote working. You never have an option for that. Your job is on the George Washington Bridge, right?
Yeah, always there.
So when COVID happened, were you still going and painting the bridge?
We weren't really painting as much, but I was still there every day. They broke us down into smaller groups so we wouldn't all get sick. God forbid someone did get sick. But we were there.
How big of a crew are you part of?
There's only 25 of us that work for the Port Authority.
For people familiar with the George Washington Bridge, they have those big metal steel towers, two of them on the bridge. When you're inside those, are there like staircases you can walk up to the top? How do you get to the top?
There's an elevator that goes from the ground all the way up, and that's about 50 feet from the very top. There's also another elevator to bring you a little higher, but not all the way up, as well as a set of stairs.
So now, if you have to go to the very, very top, how do you do that?
So that last elevator brings you, let's say, about 20 feet away, and then you have to go up a regular ladder.
Or the other option is you can walk up those barrels with the suspension cables inside and walk up that way too, right? In case the elevator breaks down.
Yeah, you can start from the ground and go all the way up those.
So now you go up there. Let's start with the day. So you drive to work. Do you park at the bridge, or do you park somewhere else and get shuttled into the bridge?
Yeah, we have a shop in Fort Lee. It's right next to where the toll plaza used to be.
So that's where you go. So you have to deal with traffic on the George Washington Bridge as a commuter every day.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. So now then you get there. And is it different every day, or do you know when you come into work, okay, I'm going to pick up where I left off yesterday? What kind of job is it that way?
Sometimes there's different projects. We're finishing up a project now. We're repainting the bottom archway that's underneath the lower level on the New York side.
So you mean the part that goes from the river up to the lower level?
Yes.
And how do you get onto that?
So the New York Tower is actually on land, and you have to drive through a public park, about 2 miles. and then you get to the bottom of the bridge.
And that's where the little red lighthouse is, right?
Yep, exactly.
And so then you have to climb up there to paint it?
Yeah, we have hoists and rigs that bring us up, or use the elevator, and you could go up to where we're working.
Okay, now let's go back up to the main level of the bridge. I mean, there's the main level, there's the lower level, and and of course towers and everything else. And I guess every 10 years or so they repaint the entire bridge. And this is, I think, 2.5 million square feet of surface. And first, it has to be, you have to scrape the paint off and then put a fresh coat on. Tell me what is the most, I guess, nerve wracking part of that you've ever had to paint.
Oof, I don't know. We don't really scrape on the George Washington Bridge. We blast it off. So you're using air hose that's shooting steel shavings out of it at almost 500 miles an hour. So that's a little nerve wracking. And you have to wear a whole suit with supplied air for lead dust and all that good stuff. So it's a little nerve wracking, especially when you're hanging 200 feet off the ground.
Yeah, I could say that would be a little bit nerve wracking. Let me ask you this. Do you ever, I mean, when I paint my house, I'm always dripping paint off my brush. Do you ever drip any down on the cars?
Uh, we usually build containments to keep everything inside, so we don't really worry so much about dropping paint.
Now, what do you do for lunch? I mean, some people have like a cafeteria at work. Do you bring your lunch with you and bring it up, say, to the top if you're going to be working on the top of the bridge? Or do you take a break and come down and go out to lunch?
Well, since it's such a to do to get dressed and so with all the supplied air for stuff like that or painting, you got to put masks on. So we take our lunch at the very end of the day. So every day we work straight through.
Try and explain to us what kind of safety equipment you're wearing and what's it attached to. How does that work?
We always put out our own safety lines and inspect everything. It's a daily process. And if they're working above the road or something, we put up nets to make sure we don't drop nothing. Double precaution. We always have a safety vest on, a harness.
Your harness is attached to what?
Yeah, so we come out the elevator, you always put a yo-yo, or so it's like a retractable lanyard, and then you use that to put out any kind of safety lines you might need to use. They're always usually vertical, just 5/8 rope, or you could always put in cables. Your safety is up to you. If you have something you want to put in, make yourself a little safer, something easier for you to work with. There's always baskets called spider baskets. You can hang those.
So now, has anybody in your 25-person crew ever, had an accident on the bridge?
Nope, no one's ever had a accident.
Good for you. That's very impressive. Now, I know they also have light bulbs. Do you guys also change light bulbs?
Yeah, actually, I go out with the electricians every so often. They do tower lighting, and usually on holidays they light up the towers. If you ever noticed it, so I go out with them and help them put out new lights.
For anybody who's never seen it, it's one of the most stunning views of the George Washington Bridge to see that lit up. It's I also understand it's pretty expensive.
Yeah, I hear their electric bill gets a little high.
What happens, for example, if it's raining or very windy? I assume you don't go anywhere near like a tower or climbing.
Yeah, yeah. They give us a weather report in the morning in case there's anything bad happening, strong winds or rain. In that case, we'll just do any groundwork and we'll maintain our equipment.
Do you ever have to work at night?
I actually have worked that night a couple times. Depends what's going on. Yeah, there's one time there was a net flying, got loose at the top of the bridge at night, so they sent us up there to take it down. So we had like a safety net set up, and it must have broke loose. So it was a little loose, flapping in the wind. So we had to go take it down.
Now, are you part of the team that unfurls the American flag every so often?
Yeah, the flag's only on holidays, and we don't do that. It's a permanent fixture of the bridge. It's inside of a steel tube, and usually electricians, people who actually worked in the facility for the George Washington Bridge, they control the winch, and it pulls down on cables and pulls the flag out.
Wow. Yeah, I hear that weighs like 450 pounds.
Yeah, it's massive. I actually didn't work that night, but a couple of years ago they changed the flag out.
Obviously, you wear a hard hat. What about shoes? I would imagine that's got to be a top contender for the safety protocol to have good shoes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we get a certain amount every year they give us to get new boots. They have to be steel toe or like composite.
So, have you ever like slipped walking up the barrels?
No, I haven't actually. Yeah, they just recoated them actually too. There's like a little bit of a gripping paint on the top of it, so you can walk.
And what about people who walk across the bridge and bike across the bridge? I'm sure you must run into them on occasion. Any crazy stories there?
The bicyclists are ruthless. They don't care if you're working or not. They just zoom past you. And one time, a lady was walking. She stopped to talk to a couple guys working, and a guy on a bike crashed right into her. It was a little messy.
And what happened after that?
Ambulance came. I think she got banged up a little bit, broke her wrist.
What other stories, when you think about, when you go to parties, what kind of things have happened that you tell people about?
There's a falcon on the top of the bridge, and when she has babies every year, she gets very violent. She hit me in my hard hat one time.
So, if somebody was going to apply to have a job like yours, painting the George Washington Bridge, what would be your number one and two recommendations for what kind of person they need to be in order to do this job?
I mean, definitely not afraid of heights, and definitely not afraid to learn, because I really didn't know much, and I was grateful that I had some good teachers. Just a good attitude, very active, because this job is tough. It's a lot of moving around, a lot of lifting stuff.
Being on that bridge with the unbelievably stunning views that you get every day. Now, most people go to work, they got four walls around them, maybe a window to the outside. You've got a 360 window all around and get these incredible views. Do you ever stop sometimes and pinch yourself and say, I'm the luckiest guy in the world?
Oh, I do sometimes. A nice day, crazy view, never gets old.
Well, it would never get old for me either, because I would never be up there in the first place. Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales About History. Now, in case you're into statistics, the towers of the George Washington Bridge are 600 feet high, the equivalent of a 60-story building. The main roadway is 210 feet above the river. Well, I want to thank our guest for today's program, the man who paints that bridge, Michael D'Onofrio, bridge painter for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. He works on that George Washington Bridge over the Hudson River between New York City and Fort Lee, New Jersey. The answer to this week's trivia question, the question was, he converted 14 square miles of dairy farmland into one of the sweetest company towns in U.S. history. And who were we talking about? Well, of course, it's Milton Hershey, founder of the famous chocolate candy bar and the town of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Next week on Amazing Tales, the amazing story of a man who never completed fourth grade, never gave up after several failures, and finally developed a formula for chocolate that continues to finance philanthropic ventures, amusement parks, museums, and theaters long after his passing. Amazing Tales About History is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe and stay healthy.